Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the glittering towers of Manhattan, where glass offices reflect the sun like mirrors of power, worked Tiana Brooks, a bright and determined 28-year-old black woman. Every morning, she walked through the doors of the company Holloway & Company, aware that her talent was her most precious weapon, but also that the arrogance of some, notably that of Richard Holloway, the general manager, could turn his daily life into a battlefield. Richard, a white man in his 50s, always wearing an impeccable suit and a condescending smile, ran the company with an iron fist. His immense ego drove him to belittle those he considered inferior, and he brooked no dissent. His favorite targets were often young women and black employees. Tiana, despite her undeniable competence, was regularly the victim of his public taunts and unfair criticism. Yet beneath her outward calm, Tiana harbored a quiet strength. She knew that every humiliation was merely a test of her resilience. And that Monday morning, when Richard called her before the entire department to ridicule her for a mistake she hadn't made, she sensed something was about to change. This seemingly ordinary day would mark the beginning of a confrontation that would forever change the course of their relationship, and bring down Richard Holloway's arrogance. On Monday morning, the office of Holloway & Co.IT was filled with a heavy atmosphere. The employees, already stressed by the start of the week, were whispering among themselves, worried about the morning meeting Richard had called. "Tiana Brooks, in my office, now," Richard said in an icy voice that echoed throughout the open space. Tiana looked up from her computer, took a deep breath, and walked toward the principal's office, aware that every step would be watched by her colleagues. "So, you made another mistake on Friday's financial report, did you?" Richard asked, his brows furrowed, a gleam of contempt in his eyes. Tiana remained calm. "Mr. Holloway, I double-checked the report. All the data is correct." Richard burst out laughing, a mocking laugh that silenced the entire room. "Correct? Really? Let's see." He took the report from his desk and flipped through it, frowning, but theatrically, to humiliate Tiana. "How can you expect to lead a project if you don't even understand these simple numbers?" The colleagues looked away uncomfortably, while Tiana felt her heart beat faster, but she held her head high. "Sir, I assure you that everything is accurate. If you like, I can show you each calculation, step by step." Richard shook his head dismissively. "Oh, stop with your explanations. Maybe you should consider a position where you don't bother anyone, like reception, perhaps." An awkward silence fell. Tiana felt anger rising, but she channeled it into determination. She wasn't going to respond with humiliation or anger. She knew that every word she spoke later would be more powerful than any insult Richard could throw at her. As she left the office, her colleagues looked at her with a mixture of admiration and pity. This was just the beginning. Once back at her desk, Tiana sat down, staring at her computer screen. Richard's insults and taunts still echoed in her mind, but instead of giving in to anger or discouragement, she felt a growing determination within her. "I can't let this continue," she muttered to herself, clenching her fists slightly. She opened the file for the project in question and reread every line, every figure, every note she had carefully prepared. Everything was perfect. No discrepancies, no errors. Richard had tried to discredit her in front of his colleagues, but the truth was on his side. Tiana then began to note down, in detail, all the humiliations and unfair remarks she had suffered since she started working at Holloway & Company. Every detail was important: dates, exact phrases, possible witnesses. She knew that documentation would be her best weapon. She also thought of her colleagues, many of them silent in the face of Richard's abuse, but respectful of her. Perhaps they could testify to her competence and Richard's unfair conduct. An idea germinated in her mind. She was not simply going to defend herself, she was going to turn the situation around with strategy and intelligence, leaving Richard to discredit himself. Tiana stood up, took a deep breath, and felt her energy shift. The fear and humiliation of this morning were transforming into a calm but relentless strength. She knew Richard couldn't continue to belittle her forever. And when she did act, it would be with a bang, in front of everyone, irrefutably. That evening, when she got home, she didn't tell anyone about her day. But in her head, the plan was beginning to form. She was going to prove her worth and make Richard pay for his arrogance, but with class, intelligence and precision. A few weeks after the public humiliation, the company Holloway & Company was preparing a key presentation to international investors. The project, key to the company's future, was intended to showcase the team's innovation and leadership. Richard, true to form, decided to assign all the work to one of his white colleagues, Mark Reynolds, downplaying Tiana's role. "Make sure everything is ready to shine in front of these investors," he ordered, smiling confidently. But he didn't know that Tiana, calm and methodical, had anticipated every move. For days she had been preparing a perfect demonstration, documenting all of his contributions and creating an irrefutable visual aid. Every number, every graph, and every step of the strategy was carefully explained, leaving little room for dispute. On the morning of the presentation, a confident Richard took the stage with Mark at his side. Tiana remained in the background, seemingly silent and discreet. The investors, impressed by the duo's professional appearance, had no idea what was about to happen. As Richard began to explain the project, Tiana raised her hand politely. "Excuse me, Mr. Holloway, may I clarify something?" Richard looked at her with a mixture of irritation and surprise. Yes, go ahead." Tiana spoke calmly and authoritatively. She presented the data, explained the strategies, and demonstrated how her ideas had been implemented from the beginning. Every graph she displayed demonstrated her mastery and central role in the project. The investors exchanged admiring glances, some whispering about her intelligence and impeccable preparation. Richard tried to intervene, trying to regain control, but each interruption was awkward and made his explanations confusing. The murmurs of investors and colleagues were now leaning in Tiana's favor. The unexpected setback for Richard was complete. He was publicly discredited in front of influential witnesses, and Tiana shone with her professionalism and talent. At the end of the presentation, the investors warmly congratulated Tiana. Richard, for the first time, felt his authority waver. His arrogance and condescension were no longer enough to mask the truth. Tiana had proven that she was indispensable and irreplaceable. After the presentation, the conference room seemed to vibrate with renewed energy. Investors continued to applaud Tiana, fascinated by her clarity and poise. Colleagues, previously mute in the face of the humiliations she endured, now exchanged admiring and respectful glances. Richard, flushed with anger and humiliation, tried to regain his composure. Well, anyway, thanks," he stammered, unable to pick up the thread. His voice trembled slightly, a detail no one missed. Tiana, remaining calm and professional, took a step back and smiled slightly. "Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to be able to share the work our team has accomplished." At that moment, Mark Reynolds, usually the surety Richard used to take credit for, whispered to his superior, "Richard, it's her, all the credit goes to Tiana." Richard felt a pang of panic. He had underestimated his colleague. Everything he had built up as a facade of authority was beginning to crumble. The investors were now asking questions directly to Tiana, who answered with confidence and precision. Each answer reinforced her image and revealed Richard's incompetence in navigating without her dominance. At the end of the meeting, the investors stood up to congratulate her. Some even offered to give her the role of project manager for the international launch. Tiana gracefully accepted on behalf of the team, highlighting each member, not out of personal vanity. Richard, publicly humiliated, left the room without a word. For the first time, his arrogance betrayed him. He realized that underestimating Tiana had been a fatal mistake. The truth was coming to light. Talent, skill and dignity could neither be hidden nor crushed by arrogance. Tiana, for her part, felt a quiet but deep satisfaction. She knew that this moment marked a turning point, not only for her, but for the whole company, which was now to recognize true merit, regardless of skin color or social status. Richard Holloway walked back into his office, the door slamming behind him with an almost comical echo. He sat down heavily in his chair, staring into space, his face tense. He had never been so at fault in front of colleagues, and worse, in front of investors. His thoughts swirled, how dare she? Why didn't anyone stand up for me? How could I underestimate Tiana Brooks? He stood up, paced, and relived the scene in the conference room. Every precise word Tiana had said, every exact figure she had presented, every admiring smile from the investors burned with shame. The image of his own clumsiness was imprinted on his mind. He hadn't just been contradicted, he'd been ridiculed. His assistant entered timidly. "Mr. Holloway, the investors have requested a follow-up with Tiana. They are very impressed." Richard froze. With Tiana? His voice trembled, a mixture of anger and disbelief. "But I run this company." The assistant looked down, aware of the irony. "Yes, but they want her recommendations. They say she led the project from start to finish." Richard felt his world crumble. For the first time, he understood that his arrogance and need to dominate others had not only tarnished his image, but endangered his true authority. All the respect he believed he commanded through fear and contempt vanished before Tiana's competence and dignity. He realized, too late, that underestimating a talented person because of their color or status was a fatal mistake. Every humiliation inflicted on Tiana now turned against him, and there was nothing he could do about it. For Richard, that day marked the beginning of a painful realization: arrogance and contempt are never allies, and true power lies not in dominating others, but in respecting and recognizing each other's talents. The days following the presentation were revealing for everyone. News of Tiana's excellence and Richard's humiliation spread quickly throughout Holloway, and company employees who had long suffered in silence began to murmur about the manager's behavior. Some colleagues came to congratulate Tiana, admiring her strength and self-control. Investors, for their part, were full of praise. Several directly offered Tiana the opportunity to lead key projects and represent the company at international meetings. Her rapid and well-deserved rise became a symbol for the entire team. Competence and integrity always outweigh arrogance and contempt. Richard, meanwhile, found himself isolated. His attempts to regain control were clumsy, and his silent apologies fell flat in the eyes of his colleagues. Every time he spoke or intervened, a low murmur ran through the room. The employees now knew that his authority was partly usurped by his arrogance. Even Mark Reynolds, who had long been Richard's unwitting accomplice, began to distance himself from him. "You have to give someone credit when they do the real work," Mark whispered to a colleague, looking at him with growing respect for Tiana. Richard then felt a bitter mixture of anger and shame. His decisions, based on contempt and condescension, had not only affected his image but also the climate within the company. He understood that true leadership is not imposed through fear or humiliation, but through example, competence and respect for others. For Tiana, the consequences were positive and clear. Her hard work and dignity had transformed not only her career, but also the company's culture. She was becoming a role model, a living example that intelligence and perseverance always triumph, even in the face of the deepest arrogance. Richard Holloway sat alone in his office, his gaze blank, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the murmur of employees in the hallways, now confident and proud of Tiana. For the first time in his career, he felt what it was like to be defeated not by competitors, but by the truth and competence of an employee he had despised. Every humiliation he had inflicted on Tiana came back to him like a boomerang. His thoughts swirled: how could I have been so blind? Why didn't I see his talent? Why did I think that putting others down would elevate me? He remembered every cruel word spoken, every public mockery, and a bitter sense of shame settled over him. He had lost not only the trust of his colleagues, but also credibility with investors, who now saw Tiana as the company's true strength. Richard knew it was too late to change the past. He had been confronted with reality. Arrogance and contempt have a price, and that price was now the loss of respect and authority that he believed he had acquired years ago. Tiana, for her part, wasn't seeking revenge. She continued her work calmly and efficiently, letting her success speak for herself. Every achievement Tiana received, every compliment she received in front of Richard, was a silent reminder of the lesson he had missed. Dignity, talent, and integrity are not measured by the arrogance or fear one inspires in others. That day, Richard understood that some lessons are too heavy to ignore, and that true power lies in respecting and recognizing others, not in humiliation. After the pivotal meeting with investors, Tiana found herself thrust into the spotlight within the company. Her skills, patience, and dignity were finally recognized, and she began to be given greater responsibilities, overseeing strategic projects and guiding entire teams. Colleagues who had previously been reluctant to speak out began to confide in her. Tiana had not only gained authority, she had become a model of resilience and leadership. Every action she took, every decision she validated, inspired confidence and motivation. Even Richard, despite his regret, was forced to acknowledge her qualities. During an internal meeting, he whispered to a colleague, "She has really changed the company." His words were tinged with genuine bitterness. He knew he had been overtaken by someone he had underestimated. Tiana, aware of the attention she was generating, chose to act gracefully. She highlighted her team's successes, shared credit, and publicly recognized each person's contributions. Her rise wasn't just personal, it was transformative. Corporate culture, commanding respect and merit rather than fear and arrogance. Investors, impressed by her vision and efficiency, decided to entrust Tiana with the launch of a major international project. Her career was taking a decisive turn, and her story became an inspiring example for all employees. Competence, intelligence, and dignity always triumph in the end, even in the face of the deepest arrogance. In the following weeks, Tiana's influence was felt in every corner of Holloway & Company. Employees, once silent in the face of Richard's abuse, now found the courage to speak out and value merit over fear. Meetings became spaces of collaboration and respect, and Richard's arrogance faded further and further with each passing day. Investors, impressed by Tiana's ability to mobilize her teams and achieve exceptional results, began to consult her directly for all major decisions. She was no longer just an employee, she had become a central figure in the company, a symbol of intelligence, competence, and dignity. Richard, aware of the transformation around him, felt a mixture of bitterness and understanding. He saw that his method of domination and humiliation was not only ineffective, but destructive. The lesson was clear: respect, listening, and valuing talents are the real keys to leadership. Even new employees joining the company quickly heard Tiana's story, how she remained calm, persistent, and intelligent in the face of humiliation. Her example inspired, guided, and motivated anyone who aspired to advance their careers while maintaining integrity. The company, once dominated by fear and arrogance, was entering a new era. And Tiana, as she continued her ascent, knew that her victory was not just personal, she had paved the way for an environment where merit and dignity finally triumphed. A few months after the presentation that changed her life, Tiana Brooks had consolidated her position within Holloway & Company. Her international project was a resounding success, hailed by investors and partners around the world. She was no longer just recognized for her skills, she embodied integrity, courage, and leadership. The employees, inspired by his example, now worked in a climate of mutual respect. The fear that once dominated the office had disappeared, replaced by trust and motivation. Even Richard Holloway, confronted with the reality of his mistakes, had begun a slow process of self-examination. His facade of arrogance had given way to an awareness of his limitations and faults. At a management meeting, Tiana spoke calmly and confidently, "This success is the success of the entire team. When we value the talent, competence, and dignity of each individual, we can accomplish the impossible." His words were greeted with heartfelt applause. Richard, sitting in a corner, felt a mixture of regret and respect. He finally understood that true leadership is not imposed by fear, but earned the respect and recognition of others. Tiana silently savored the moment. Her journey of resilience and perseverance had not only transformed her career, but also the entire culture of the company. She had become a symbol of triumph over arrogance, a living example that talent and dignity always end up being recognized. And so, a new era began at Holloway & Company, where merit, collaboration, and respect for each other finally took precedence over arrogance and injustice. Tiana Brooks, through her courage and wisdom, had paved the way for this lasting change, and her story would continue to inspire all those who dared to believe in themselves despite the obstacles.